Intrigue and Isekai LitRPG Adventure, Ends of Magic Book 1, audiobook by Kevin Chapter 30 For the calm before a metal storm. Nathan examined his new level up. Phew. Okay, that's a lot. Let's go into the details of this. First, deepened stamina was a straight upgrade of stamina. Great. Awesome. It meant it would be harder for Nathan to run out of stamina and otherwise didn't change how he used the resource at all. He wondered if it would also change how overloading on stamina would work. Something to test. A lot of things to test, most likely. Second, Antimage's impassivity seemed good too. He'd gained some resistance to mind-affecting skills while raging. That part was amazing. Nathan had been mostly defenseless against skills like those of the Giant's Rest slave masters or the officers of Agman, though rage seemed to provide some base level of resistance. But now that protection was explicit. As a trade-off, he'd lost the part of Juggernaut's Wrath, where the skill would trigger his rage automatically when he was badly injured. I never really liked that my rage could trigger on its own. Even if I have better control of it now, it still feels dangerous. Finally, implacable inertia seemed like it just did more of what Juggernaut's inertia already did. Significantly greater momentum replaced greater, and he now had more immunity against being moved by magical effects. Curiously, his rage skill hadn't changed at all. Honestly, that was fine. Raging Thrill was a kind of rage Nathan understood at this point, and he knew how to use it. It was also the most potentially dangerous of his skills. The rush of power and thrill of the fight had almost led to several unwise choices in the heat of the moment. With battle meditation, he felt confident he had a handle on that, but he didn't want to navigate that danger again if he could help it. Though a more dangerous rage skill would also make me significantly more powerful, I bet Woundless Berserker and Manadrinker Einherjar would have developed Raging Thrill, but the new skills Nathan had got made him more powerful in their own way. Improved Antimagic was basically perfect. It greatly enhanced his Antimagic, especially for protection, and it was only while he was raging. That meant a modicum of control without weakening the talent itself. Still won't be able to handle enchanted items for very long, and if I get ambushed I won't be any more immune to magic until I rage. But that's what Notice is for. The next was Strenuous Agility, which just made him faster, more agile, and made stamina spent on mobility more effective. That might be the most important class skill Nathan had. If it worked as a flat multiplier on airwalking, it would be incredible. Strenuous Agility also sounded like it would synergize amazingly well with all of his other mobility skills. A solid win for his Get Better Mobility goal. Next to both of those skills, hand-to-hand expertise was just okay. It made him better at fighting. That was nice, but it felt more like a prerequisite to being an effective high-level adventurer than something that would really push him over the top. He had to hold his own against lower-level fighters like the Agman Legionaries, and this skill would help him do that. But it wouldn't let him beat somebody like Eldred in a straight duel. Well, unless I'm significantly higher level than he is, which I might be. We've taken a ton of risks recently. This dungeon was worth 9 levels. That's a lot. Nathan sighed, trying not to think of all of the potential he'd passed by from the other classes. The road not traveled. This class will serve my purposes, no point ruminating on the others. Look forward to the next class development. In 155 levels, that's going to take a while. He meditated for a while before bed, not thinking about anything in particular but simply trying to feel calm about the significant decision he just made. The next morning, Stella got a brief summary of the Delve Day by message. It had been a pretty successful event, no giant monsters, no team wipes. A couple of teams had lost a few people, but a grand total of almost a dozen dungeons had been cleared. The wilderness had been pushed back just a bit. The villages would be able to stretch their fields farther, the trade routes would be safer. It was a hard gain to conceptualize. Gemor had been doing this sort of work for generations, slowly clearing an inhabitable zone at the cost of adventurer lives. Nathan gazed out across the valley below. It didn't seem like a small gain. But then he saw an angular spike protruding from the next valley over and shivered. I think that's a Quasian marker over there. We've reclaimed a little bit of land, but not much. And no way are we going to go into a Quasian dungeon anytime soon. Too much risk of a grave tangle. Nathan shook his head, looking across to where Stella was practicing magic. She was working on her lightning, aligning it more closely to real lightning. It had definitely grown more powerful as a result, and Nathan could faintly feel the static from across the castle. He walked over, waving to Sarah as she hunkered over her rifle. The headshot gunslinger watched the occasional bolts of lightning suspiciously as she focused on something out of Nathan's sight. Arl and Kachai were down in the courtyard, doing some light sparring. Nathan approached Stella and reached for her shoulder to get her attention. He got zapped for his trouble, an electric arc flickering out from the red-haired mage to his hand. "Ow, I was not expecting that," he said, shaking his hand back and forth to dispel the lingering electrical shock. Implacable impassivity had prevented it from hurting, but the spell touching him through his anti-magic had been enough of a surprise that Nathan recoiled. Stella turned around, her expression a combination of sheepish and triumphant. "Ha! I thought that might do something to you. Not so immune to real electricity, are you? It's blasphemously hard to control, though." Nathan raised his eyebrows. "Dangerous stuff. You staying safe?" She shrugged. "It's still magical, and I can control it with my magic. I've worked out how to make an electrostatic field that prevents it from touching me. A charge builds up on the outside and will zap anything that gets close. I'm wondering if I can put some force mana into it and turn it into my own version of mage armor. Have any ideas?" Nathan shook his head. He had no idea how mage armor worked. It was one hell of a spell and definitely not something his earth insights could help with. Instead, he asked the question that was on his mind. "Can you give me a hand with my new class skill? I've got one that should help protect me against magic even better." Stella rolled her eyes. "Because that's a fire that needed to burn hotter. Fine. What do you want?" Nathan gestured down the hill. "I'll go to the bottom of the slope, and I want you to stop me from getting to the top. You know that explosive force and conjured stone still push me backwards, and I want to know if I'm more resistant now. Let's do it twice. Probably without natural magic for now. I want to see how it works against normal magic first." Stella assented, and they tried it. For the first time, Nathan tried it without his rage. Stella could slow him by detonating fireballs just ahead of him. She could rock him back slightly, while light mana could still dazzle him and make it difficult to find his next steps. She hit him with conjured balls of rock, though Nathan had pretty good luck dodging those. She even turned the ground beneath his feet to slippery mud that should have sent Nathan sliding back down the slope. But he relied on his magic absorption and myriad mobility skills to power through the effect, flying up the hill like he was sprinting on flat ground. I wasn't actively trying to use strenuous agility, but I could definitely feel it. That made it easy. Then he tried it again, this time activating his rage at the bottom of the climb. Nathan flew up the slope, ignoring all of Stella's attempts to stop him. She'd stepped it up, taking advantage of multicasting to barrage him with her panoply of explosives, conjured rocks, and blasts of light. Nathan powered through it all, not even bothering to dodge the conjured boulders that should have shattered his body. With the extra boost to strength and speed from rage, Nathan went up the slope like he'd been fired out of a cannon, using his momentum to leap atop the wall and land next to Stella. His breathing was barely labored, and he exulted in the thrill of the simulated combat. "Damn, I've got a lot of stacking buffs to speed and movement right now atop my already enhanced strength. This is a pretty significant change, and my magic absorption, is keeping my stupidly high stamina pool full no matter how much I spend on motion. Stella looked a bit frustrated by her failure to even slow him down. Let's try some natural magic. She zapped him again, this time with a more significant burst of electricity. It stung, but improved anti-magic also seemed to protect against Stella's new skills. The electricity was still magical enough that he was mostly protected, though he picked up some faint electrical burns that healed almost instantly. Stella grinned at the sight, pleased by her display of power. Then she rocked back and forth, considering the consequences. I'll need to be careful with that when you're on the battlefield. Can't blast away with abandon anymore, Nathan scoffed. I can survive and recharge regardless. That natural magic is powerful enough, but so long as you don't strike me directly, it'll be fine. But when you do hit me directly, maybe don't use it. We both need to practice with our new skills. You were moving like a stalker fleeing a fireball. Stella gestured down into the courtyard. Now mimic that stalker and vanish. I want to practice this new magic more. Go practice your other new skills with Arl and Kache. Unless you would like to teach me more magic. She had a hopeful gleam in her eye, but Nathan shook his head and hopped off the wall, using slow fall to make the 20-foot drop no more impactful than stepping off a staircase. She's pushing pretty hard for new magic, and I promise to teach her more. I want to make sure her fundamentals are solid on light before we move on to plasma. Maybe I should ask her if there are other kinds of mana she wants to figure out next. I'm curious how I would do void or shadow. They're both an absence, which seems hard to explain scientifically. Maybe I could go over the ideal gas law to help with air mana. Nathan shook his head, clearing his thoughts as he approached the other male-oriented members of the Heirs. He raised a hand in greeting as they broke off from their latest spar. Down to help me try out my new class skills. Arl raised one sarcastic eyebrow. We saw you with Stella. Need more help than that. Shrugging, Nathan grinned back innocently. Well, one of my new skills says I will be faster, hit harder, and be more skilled at unarmed combat. Hard to test that with Stella. The master of many weapons stepped forward to square off against Nathan. Well, this sounds like a nemesis for me to slay. He drew a pair of unenchanted practice sabers. Over the course of several rounds of sparring, it became clear that Nathan's melee capabilities had taken a massive step forward. He was more certain of his motions, and they flowed more smoothly, as if Nathan had been practicing each block and stance for decades instead of only a few months. He still wasn't winning against Arl, but that was because most of the lanky swordsman's skills focused on melee combat. Nathan's style of rapid and unconventional movements was still continuing to develop, aided by strenuous agility. I kind of wish I'd tried capoeira, since it seems like a martial art that would translate nicely. Well, I've watched some videos. Let's use that enhanced memory and see what I can learn. At that thought, he started to incorporate more handsprings and fanning kicks into his style. It was all about using continuous motion to push more power through each strike, and Nathan was getting better and better at controlling and utilizing his body's momentum. Mid-tier tumbling 8 achieved. I'm going to try using my rage now, Nathan cautioned. Arl stepped back, wiping sweat from his forehead. You weren't already, Nathan smirked back, feeling satisfied. Not yet. He immersed himself in the thrill of the fight and resumed the spar. He'd gotten more comfortable using his rage in practice. The development of focused mind into battle meditation had dramatically increased his control without neutering his power. This time the fight was much more evenly matched, and Nathan's incredible strength overpowered Arl's defense. The wiry fighter switched his style, not blocking Nathan nearly as often and focusing on controlling the distance instead. In the blink of an eye, he switched to wielding heavier weapons with longer reach, buying him more space. But it was hard for him to match Nathan's mobility and speed, and Nathan powered through a hit from an unenchanted greatsword to punch his friend in the ribs, sending Arl flying backwards with the crunch of bone. Nathan felt shaken by just how much strength had been behind that blow. He hadn't really meant it to be that powerful, but with so many stacking modifiers atop an already superhuman strength, it was hard to remember how much force was in each motion. The rage doesn't help. Kacha was already healing Arl, who was getting to his feet as he wiped away a dribble of blood-flecked froth. He coughed once, then said, "In a real fight, I think I'd just pull out the shotgun. You're the match of any fighter of your level when you rage, Nathan. Though with enchanted weapons that might change. You'd have to respect my blows." Nathan nodded at the comment. It was possible this was bad practice, since he was getting used to just accepting blows in order to land hits. Even sharpened weapons backed up by skills failed to do much more than cause minor gashes that healed over in seconds. They had to be enchanted to really hurt him, and those weapons would quickly lose their power after hitting Nathan a few times. I wonder if my new, improved anti-magic will help protect me from enchanted weapons too. That would be cool. But I don't want to destroy an expensive weapon to test it. Let's let our enemies do that. They sparred a few more times, with Nathan pretending Arl's weapons were enchanted, and Kacha calling out whenever Arl landed a debilitating hit. It was definitely a different experience. Arl's build shown and Nathan was unable to get past his incredible variety of attacks without getting tagged somewhere critical. I need to keep in mind that I'll usually get hit closing the distance to a melee fighter. Hopefully, my defensive enhancements and perfected body will let me shrug off whatever they can do. I just need to protect my head and neck, really. After he was done, Nathan directed his attention to Koch. I remember the first time we sparred. Do you remember? When you shield bashed me hard enough to break my jaw. Nathan spread his arms wide invitingly. Well, wanna spar? Koch looked at him with ill-disguised unease on his face. I might prefer to avoid raising the past in such a way. Nathan was about to press him. He wanted to practice ways to get around a large shield like the one that Koch bore. But Koch was saved by Stella's voice from atop the wall. Hang on, I think there's a situation. There's an all-adventurer call not too far from here. A team spotted some magical constructs advancing on Terran. She frowned, clearly parsing another message. Then she swallowed. They've been tentatively identified as old Gemor war constructs. I wonder if somebody woke a dungeon on Delve Day and didn't report it. Chapter 35. A catastrophe of a plan. The heirs piled out of the fortress in a hurry. An all-adventurer call was serious. That wasn't the sort of alert you put out if you spotted some dangerous beasts lurking around town. It was much closer to, we are going to get wiped out. And the heirs weren't too far away from Terran. They could probably get there by evening if they ran the whole way. And with everybody now over level 81, they damn well better keep up that pace. Even if I almost expect the place to be a smoldering ruin by the time we get there. Old Gemor war constructs sound like a bad deal, though it might even be a giant's rest trap. But that seems unlikely. An all-adventurer call is going to bring in a lot more than just us. But it's worth bringing up as a possibility. Nathan gave voice to his concerns as he sprinted across the slope. Think this is another giant's rest trap? Koch ran beside him, his body limned in a faint golden glow that helped the wolfman keep up, even if it didn't quiet the clanking of his plate armor. Mayhaps, he replied, but we will not ignore such a call. The only course of action is for us to stay on guard against such a thing. Much of this responsibility falls to you, Nathan. I suppose that's true. I'm the one with multiple perception skills. Sarah's also got a few, but my anti-magic lets me see through magical stealth, which usually beats out perception skills. And against Giant's Rest, that's a significant advantage. Nathan resolved to keep an eye out as the heirs sprinted across the barren landscape. The sun beat down from high above, and sweat started rolling down Nathan's body and soaking his clothes. Luckily, Stella had a near-infinite supply of water skins in her pockets. Nathan almost asked Arl to uncoil the dimensional portal to the pool that the ashblood cobras had spawned in, but thought better of it. It's probably hella nasty in there, and we don't have time to mess around with getting it in the right orientation to work. Maybe we should have figured it out during our last few days of downtime, but it's probably better left to the enchanters of Gemor. After a few hours, everybody but Nathan was flagging. The ground was rough and they'd been running for hours. Most of their gear was packed away in dimensional bags, but they still had to carry the bags themselves, and Nathan was impressed by the divine magic that allowed Kachai to keep up the punishing pace in his armor. But this, exactly this, was what they trained for. They were running to relieve a village from a threat. A scary threat, to be sure. After Stella had confirmed they were headed in that direction, she'd received updates from the guild on the situation. There were currently 2 teams in Terran. One had been resting in the village while the other had been clearing a minor dungeon nearby. This isn't our fault, is it? There's the possibility of that message from the giant crystal eye broke activating something. But that's an Edrani Empire thing, and these are old Gemor constructs. They shouldn't talk to each other. More likely this is separate. A little later, Stella reported that the 2 teams had driven off an attack, though they had taken some casualties. The war constructs were reported as fully functional and showing signs of being newly made. That last update was bad. It meant an old Gemor fortress foundry was online and building more of the enchanted magical robots. That turned the mission from a simple defend into a search and destroy. They needed to find the forge and blow it up before it built an army of the dangerous magical robots. More teams were being called in, and the elites were on standby. The heirs would arrive next and relieve the teams already at Terran. Then they'd go on the offensive, trying to scout out the foundry. They'd either destroy it themselves or call in the elites to clean up. And they're not sending in the Guardians because this could be a distraction by Giant's Rest or an assassination attempt. The Guardians could come in and get jumped by a couple of archmages. These are the kinds of games the greater powers play against each other. And if the elites took care of everything, there wouldn't be a next generation to replace them. All of this made Nathan appreciate the value of messaging more and more. If Stella couldn't cast message, they would have no idea that there was a problem. As it was, they were fully looped in on the plan, and the defenders knew when they'd arrive, which was soon. The heirs were about to summit a hill that would give them a view of Terran when Nathan caught the glint of sunlight reflecting off metal from a pile of boulders to their right. What could be that reflective out in this wasteland? A very shiny construct that's sticking a tiny portion of itself up to watch us. Hytir noticed 3 achieved. He called out a warning. Behind those rocks, the heirs pivoted smoothly, Nathan running ahead as 24 four-legged metallic bodies swarmed over the rocks. They definitely shared design principles with the sentry constructs Nathan had fought at the last dungeon of Old Gemor, but these were smaller, lower to the ground, and moved more quickly. Scouts. Their bodies were fairly small, about the size of a big dog. Most of the central body consisted of a forward-facing armored cannon. The 4 limbs holding them up were shaped like a spider's legs, but thick and sturdy. Each leg ended in a broad footpad that appeared to stick to nearly any surface. They also had a long tail, a jointed metal limb capped with 2 bladed spikes that looked like they could scythe or pincer. They share some similarities with the constructs inside the Edrani outpost, but these are smaller and have 1 ranged weapon instead of a half-dozen. The cannon spoke as one, sending a wave of fireballs towards the heirs. Nathan was in front, running towards the line of combat constructs. A full third of the fireballs exploded around him, but with his rage active, he plowed through the fire without so much as a hint of pushback. Nathan felt energized as his stamina filled, and then overflowed from the deluge of offensive magic. The heirs will be fine, especially without me fouling any magical defenses they set up. The first construct continued its advance and flipped its body around to send the metal tail cracking towards Nathan like a whip. He leapt over the strike in a flip, twisting in midair to land atop the machine. He braced himself and wrenched apart the ball joint that connected the construct's leg to its body. A flash of motion was all the warning Nathan had to duck under a set of blades headed towards his neck. The construct he stood on collapsed, and another pair of bladed spikes stabbed towards his chest. Nathan juked them despite the uncertain footing, grabbing the segmented metal tail that they were attached to. High-tier dodging footwork too achieved. He pulled, yanking himself forward and unbalancing the scout construct that had tried to stab him. He rolled past it, grabbing one of its legs on the way. He put his full momentum into pulling the leg, lifting the machine off its feet and hurling it forward to slam into another. The constructs scrabbled over the rocky ground, trying to regain their balance. Not so heavy, and a lot of fun to throw around. Then the shooting started. Sarah's pistols cracked in rapid succession, punctuated by the suppressed sound of Arl's shotgun. There was the crackle of lightning, and a few of the constructs surrounding Nathan jerked with electrical discharge. But he was still surrounded and had to fully exert his movement skills to avoid the barrage of attacks coming his way. Either they'd figured out he was immune to magic, or he was simply too close, because they attacked him exclusively with the blades on their tails. The blades were only a foot long, but they could whip them around with enough force to shatter the stones beneath his feet. Nathan jumped and rolled over attacks, flipping high into the air in a stamina-assisted leap, only to smash down atop another construct, his knee shattering its cannon in an anti-magic-assisted strike. Mid-tier tumbling 9 achieved. Nathan blocked the next stab, guiding the vicious blades to the side before wrapping both hands around the metal tail. He pulled, this time planting his feet to leverage his enhanced strength to hoist the construct off its feet. Then he ran a few steps, dragging the writhing metal payload a short way before throwing all of his inertia into his makeshift flail, pivoting and hurling it at another construct that was about to fire its cannon at the heirs. Watching the two go down in a flailing pile of limbs, he smirked. Yeah, that's satisfying. He paid for his inattention a moment later, as a blow hit Nathan from the left side. It was a whip-crack of sharpened metal which tore through his chest and sent him tumbling. He rolled as blood sprayed, coming to his feet quickly and looking towards the robot-like creature. Then Arl's new greatsword cleaved through its body lengthwise, and it dropped without a sound. Nathan spun instantly, searching for the next threat. 8 of the scout constructs remained, and they reassembled for another assault. It was a bad idea. Stella launched a huge fireball that used air mana to encourage a larger explosion, outright destroying 2 and knocking over the rest. Nathan, Arl, and Katja moved in for the kill, quickly dismantling the constructs as they struggled to their feet. One of them turned and booked it, vaulting over the boulders the ambush had emerged from. Nathan was about to sprint after it when Sarah's rifle bullet slammed into its center and out the other side, dropping the construct as its enchantments failed with a jerky stagger. Scanning the battlefield, Nathan saw that it was littered with metal bodies. None appeared to be moving beyond some spasmodic jerks. Kachai walked over to the twitchy construct and brought his hammer down, smashing the metal into a flat pancake against the ground. You have leveled up to level 91. You have handily defeated an ambush from old Gemor Scout constructs. Nathan nodded at the box, satisfied as he walked up to Kachai. All good, new hammer seems to be working out. Kachai hefted the weapon in question, his canines bared in a wolfish grin. It is very effective against this enemy. He turned to the rest of the heirs. Any wounds? Sarah lowered her rifle, running her eyes over the neighboring hills before stowing the weapon. No, unless you count Nathan, who's got clothes for him. Nathan looked down. He'd only taken the one wound and was just expecting to see a tear in his shirt and the resulting bloodstain. And the bloodstain was there on bare and healed skin. He was completely naked. How did that happen? Oh, right, the fireballs at the beginning. The explosions didn't even bat me around, but the same can't be said for my clothes. Welp. Nathan accepted another set from Arl, pulling them on quickly before they got moving once more. Arl shot a look back towards the battlefield. I regret leaving such a weight of good metal behind. Even the supply of enchanted blades and mana crystals would be worth good coin. Kache opened his mouth, his eyes stern. Arl interrupted him before the armored warrior could get started. We need to relieve Terran. I know. As they spoke, Stella turned to Nathan. I need something that can punch through metal better. If something is protected from lightning and behind armor, there isn't much I can do to it. Light can't melt through metal quickly, and fireballs only stagger a bigger construct. Is it time to teach me of plasma yet? I could probably teach her. But she still doesn't have a good handle on magnetic mana, which I think is important for that. The other option is a railgun, but I don't think her control is good enough for that either. If you're worried about armor, you could try using magnetic spells. You'll need really good control of magnetic mana for the next insights, and you could probably throw the constructs around with those spells, or crush them. Magnetism should directly affect steel. You just need to create a really strong magnetic field around your targets. But be careful around Kache. Wouldn't want to send him flying through the air accidentally. Kache gave Nathan a betrayed look as they crested the hill, but whatever he was about to say was interrupted by the sight of the town atop the hill opposite. Terran had been built atop a mesa, the only entrance a winding path that crossed an arch of red rock to reach the front gates. It was a beautiful town, built from the red and white sandstone that reminded Nathan of the Grand Canyon. All of the other sides of the mesa were sheer drops of craggy stone, each capped with a supplemental wall of worked rock that made an approach seemingly impossible. They watched as a huge fireball arced towards the gatehouse, detonating against the sturdy building and sending chunks of stone flying through the air. One of the towers leaned drunkenly backward, seemingly on the edge of collapsing. The sound of the explosion took a few seconds to reach them, indicating how far away they were. Nathan tracked the path of the fireball back down to the base of the mesa, where light reflected off serried ranks of shining metal. There were maybe 100 constructs arranged in a loose formation. In the center of the array of metal was a large triangular shape, akin to a small building, that seemed to have fired the artillery spell. Bet I can hit the siege construct from here, Sarah said, her hands already going to her bag. Kache caught Nathan's eye with a questioning glance. Nathan shrugged and replied, if you think you can do serious damage, then that's not a bad idea. It's better than trying to attack their formation directly. Should we try to sneak around and group up with the adventurers in Terran? Sarah squinted down her rifle, panning it around the town. Nope. Scout constructs are scattered around. It's a full siege. Stella yawned, arching her back theatrically before clapping her palms together. Time to break the besiegers. Nathan rolled his eyes at the dramatics. Let's at least get into a defensible position. So if all of that tries to swarm us, we won't just go down under the weight of metal. He pointed out a position a short distance away. It was a hill with a series of rocky pillars and outcroppings that broke up sight lines and provided cover. It would give the heirs the ability to hide, take cover, or retreat down the opposite slope if needed. It took only a few minutes to run over, where Stella started carving some rock out of an outcrop to give them a more fortified position. Sarah kept watch over the valley below as she hunkered over her rifle. After a few minutes, she pulled out an enchanted round and chambered it. The construct is charging up for another attack. I'll take the shot when its shell opens up. No sound for a moment, please." They all shut up, watching with bated breath as Sarah relaxed her body, focusing her entire attention down the length of her masterwork rifle and on the faraway enemies. In the distance, the triangular construct opened up, fire blooming inside the metal shell. Sarah's rifle spoke with a suppressed pop. Nothing happened. Arl sighed and spoke reassuringly. "It's okay, you." He was cut off as the construct below exploded. It took a few seconds for the sounds of the distant explosion to reach them, but it was a sustained roar as metal fragments were thrown high into the sky. Sarah looked up at her brother. "You were saying—" Nathan held up a hand, watching the ranks of metal constructs swarm as if somebody had just kicked an anthill. "They're headed in this direction. Should we run? I don't think we can fight all of that at the same time." Sarah checked the angles on the army a few miles away. "They're headed for the site where we fought the scout constructs. Not moving too fast. We've got time." The heirs retreated into the hollow which Stella had carved from the stone, while Nathan stayed outside, ducking down so only his head was sticking up over a rock. The rationale for him being the scout was that he was immune to magic, so if any constructs searched for them using line-of-sight magical sensors, they wouldn't ping off him. Though if they're using something that goes around corners, they'll find the heirs anyway, and I'm not exactly invisible either. I kind of wish I'd gotten a stealth skill. Nathan's considered what they'd learned. So they know about us fighting the scout constructs. That means they've got some kind of communication ability. Nathan watched as the army of constructs divided into 9 separate units, moving cautiously over the terrain. It looked almost like they were searching in a grid pattern to ensure they didn't leave a threat behind them. Nathan explained what he was seeing over his shoulder, then elaborated on their plans. "Well, we've bought some more time for Terran. Should we try to fight or run? There's a lot of them out there, and we won't be able to fight one group without a whole army descending on us." Stella shrugged. "I could probably dig this hollow deeper, then conjure up a wall of stone so they don't find us. Then after dark we could go into town." Kache frowned. "I wish to be able to assist Terran if the constructs launch an assault. I worry that by hiding we strike ourselves blind. Can we tunnel towards Terran?" Stella wordlessly shook her head, gesturing to the distance involved to indicate how ridiculous Kache's question was. "I also don't want to rely on them being blinded after nightfall," Nathan said. "If they're using magical sensors, they might see better than we do in the dark." Arl's voice was thoughtful, though clenched hands near his weapon pouches betrayed his tension. "We know where they are, where they're going, and what their likely next moves are going to be. Is there a way we can use that to defeat them?" Everybody looked at Nathan. He blinked. "What? Just because I said if you had perfect information you should be able to win doesn't mean that I always know exactly what to do." He paused. "Wait a second. I just had an idea." Chapter 36. A complicated battlefield. Nathan scanned the area as he talked through the premise for his idea. They were next to a tall outcrop of pale reddish rock that crowned the hill, with the view down the slope blocked by a fold in the rocky landscape. "The constructs are in 8 groups, conducting a search from where we fought the group of scouts. If we stay here, they'll find us in the next half hour." He waved his hand dismissively. "It doesn't really matter if they attack immediately or pull back, as long as we can hold against that smaller group. What happens after is that the rest of the groups reform and hit us at once. They might hit us sequentially, but that would be awful tactics and might let us defeat them in detail." The heirs nodded along. Everything he'd said made sense, and so Nathan continued. "So they're going to attack us here in this terrain, most likely in one overwhelming wave. And we need to survive and kill as many as we can." This time the round of nods was slower, less confident. Stella gestured impatiently for him to get on with it, so he did with a smirk. "We can still run, and maybe we should. But we might be able to take them all out here if Stella can figure out a specific insight of lightning I have for her, and we can protect her until the primary attack arrives. What do we say? Stella started dancing in place, radiating excitement. Yes, let's do it. By the teachings of Jalba we should flee, Kachai reasoned. We have killed the problem and bought Terran respite. Arl and Sarah exchanged a series of complex looks, but Arl was the one to eventually speak. If this works, then we'll level from it and be better able to survive the next Giant's Rest ambush, or the next dungeon, and we'll save whatever adventurers might die against that swarm. He directed his attention to Nathan. Will it work? We have a little bit of space. If this doesn't pan out, there will still be time to run or hide. Kachai, stop smothering my fire, Stella said, grinning with excitement. The divine Justicar shook his canine head. Kia said that we would burn our own path. I hoped it would be a wiser one, but now we've managed to drip blood in the eyes of an old Gemor construct army and intend to fight it. He sighed, resigned. Speak your aim, Nathan. With Kachai's agreement, Nathan hurriedly spun to Stella, reviewing the concept he meant to teach her. When you first learned about electricity, you used force shields to contain and conduct the mana. I've seen you playing around with the interaction between lightning and force. How well do you understand it? Stella's grin didn't waver. Lightning mana can't go through a force shield. It will follow it, though. If I set the other potential on the other side, the electricity will flow along the surface of the shield. I've been trying to make force blades that carry a lightning charge. But the edge is slippery, and the voltage gets lost there. I've been addressing that with magnetic mana, but it doesn't work well with a moving force construct. Great, Nathan said, thinking through his approach. The limit on the size of a spell is how quickly you can channel mana, right? The thing preventing you from destroying that entire army with lightning is that you can't cast quickly enough. You've got an absolutely stupid amount of mana with all of the crystals from the last dungeon. Stella's brows knit, trying to follow where he was going. I can only channel enough mana for a lightning bolt every few seconds, and it takes even longer if I'm also casting shields to protect us from the construct's spells. If we're fighting a ton of constructs, I'm going to need to focus primarily on defense. The mage smiled with satisfaction. But yes, my mana supply is blasphemous. So if you channel all of the mana out ahead of time, it's ready to go. She shook her head. I can't control it for long. None of my spells are that stable. A spell that's meant to explode gets harder and harder to control as you put more mana into it. But what if it's a spell designed to be stable, so the mana is external but ready to be repurposed? Nathan wasn't quite in full Socratic dialogue mode because he genuinely didn't know if his idea would pan out yet. She can't spend a lot of time practicing, not for what I have in mind. Her tone became disappointed. You can't really change the spell weave once you cast it. You should know that. We've talked enough about magic. I suppose if it's raw power it can be guided by another spell, but I can't put the stored mana into a complex spell. It would be crude, a waste of power. I think crude targeting is okay, so long as you can protect the heirs. What I want to explain is something called a capacitor. I think it will let you store a ton of electricity mana, ready to be unleashed. And force mana seems like the perfect way to store it. The red-haired mage's eyes darted around as she raced ahead of his line of thought. You're saying that I can channel lightning mana into a stationary force shield and use it later. It might work, but I'd need a huge shield. I can't cast force too far away from me yet. It would leak a lot around the edges, so I'd need to spend a lot of focus holding it together. Is that all a capacitor is? Shaking his head, Nathan explained in greater detail. Not quite. You understand you have two areas of charge, and there's a potential across the shield. That potential is where you store the energy of the mana. Nathan could tell that Stella was understanding what he was saying. He went on. How strong the force is will let you store a more powerful charge before the force shield breaks, but how big it is will let you store more charge. You can maximize the area and minimize the exposed edges by making it a big loop. If you fuse the ends of the shield together, then you only need to worry about 2 edges instead of 4. If you curl it into a big spiral, you can pack all of the exposed edges together and contain them in a smaller area. Stella's eyes were literally blazing with excitement. Could I make it a sphere, so there are no exposed edges? And if surface area is what determines how much charge can be stored, then I can make it convoluted, give it lots of deep indents to help it store electricity mana. Mid-tier lecturing aid achieved. You know, I had something closer to a giant cylinder in mind, but an indented sphere might work, though I think you'll get concentrations of charges wherever the tip of the indentations are. A fractal surface might work well. Maybe make multiple, I don't know. You don't have too much time. Nathan looked around at the terrain. And make it on the other side of the outcrops. We don't want the constructs to see them. They'll probably attack them if nothing else, and I don't think these lightning storage balls will survive many attacks. All it would take is a single crack for them to explode. Stella didn't respond, already starting to focus on her magic. Nathan turned back to the rest of the heirs. He'd vaguely assumed they'd be paying attention, but instead there was a low argument going on between Arl and Sarah. Arl had pulled out the armor from the Edrani Empire dungeon, laying the metallic robe on the ground. Nathan caught Arl slashing his hand down to make a point. I need this. Can't always rely on Stella or Kache for a shield against magic, and this armor will protect me from what those constructs aim my way. Sarah's response was just as furious. Or it could kill you. Nathan couldn't tell if it had a curse on it. Our father was clear. You do not use items you don't know. But he didn't have these allies, Arl shot back. He gestured at Nathan and Kache. If it is cursed, then Nathan can break the magic before it kills me, and Kache can heal any wounds. I need this to fight properly. I'm supposed to let the enemy break upon me. I can't do that if I'm behind a shield. And Stella can't shield us this time. She's busy with Nathan's surprise. Sarah turned to Nathan. Convince him this is a bad idea. I'm actually not sure it is. It's risky, but not that terrible of a risk. And having Arl able to take a hit, he's much better at this kind of combat than I am. Nathan shook his head. I don't think it is cursed. And with me and Kache here, it's less risky than it could be. I'm just worried we won't be able to test how good the armor is. Arl's face didn't lighten. If anything, he looked even more serious than before. I'm doing this. Nathan, I'll tell you all as well every few seconds. If I stop, then get this armor off me. Sarah threw up her arms in frustration but stayed silent as her brother quickly stripped off his lightly enchanted leathers. Soon enough, his lithely muscled form stood just in his underclothes. Nathan couldn't help but notice how hot Arl was as the younger man stared at the armor. Teammates, Nathan. Drama in the team would be an absolutely terrible idea. Teammates. No matter how hot Arl is, or how cute Stella looks when she's figuring out new magic. Maybe in 5 years when everybody's a bit more mature, but that's a long way off. Arl moved to put on the armor, but as soon as he grabbed it, the clothing sent tendrils of metal climbing up his arms. Nathan started forward before he remembered the armor doing a similar thing to him. The wiry man's face was nervous as he watched the strands of metal coil up his limbs. I'm fine. It's not hurting me. He continued to reassure the rest of the heirs as the armor flowed over his body. It only took 20 seconds, much less time than it would have taken to don and secure normal armor. You know, I hope this doesn't take over his mind. We didn't think of that. Arl looked down at the suit. The metal covered him like a second skin, reaching from his shins to his neck and extending down his arms to his wrists. He flexed his arms and did a few quick hops, demonstrating that the metal flexed smoothly, the woven strands sliding over each other soundlessly. The sigils activated and glowed a faint gold in the bright sunlight. Sarah looked impressed, but before she could speak, Nathan pinned Arl with an intense look. Arl, what was the first spell Stella cast on me? Arl blinked at Nathan, then frowned. She tried to trip you with a force spell back in the dining hall. Nathan nodded. Do you feel normal? I'm going to touch your head, see if I can feel any mental manipulation going on with the armor." Arl nodded, looking suddenly hesitant. Nathan stepped forward and put a hand on top of his short-cut hair, closing his eyes and extending the magical senses that magic absorption granted him. There was something there. Strands of mana extended off the suit of armor and towards Arl's brain. But they weren't mental magic intending to control somebody. Nathan had felt that before, and it felt slick and slimy. These reminded Nathan more of rigid constructs, awaiting manipulation. Ways for Arl to control the armor, not for it to control him. High Tier Identify 3 achieved. I suppose debugging a friend's armor minutes before being swarmed by an army of war constructs counts as a dangerous enough situation to help with skill ranks. Nathan withdrew his hand. "I think the armor will respond to mental commands. Try telling it to do things, maybe starting with a helmet." Arl looked down at the armor. More tendrils flowed up from the neck and encapsulated his head, while clear goggles of force magic formed over his eyes. Sarah shook her head. "I suppose it is a treasure from a dragon's hoard." She punched Arl in the shoulder before shaking out her hand with an aggrieved expression. It was still a dumb decision. They all jumped as a crackling explosion erupted from where Stella was working. The noise ramped up, and the air spun to see a cascade of lightning spill out from a hovering ball of force. The sheet of incandescent light burned for nearly 20 seconds before petering out, leaving a glassy trench in the ground only 20 feet beyond Stella. Now that's a lot of power. Once the sound from the bottled lightning was gone, they could hear Stella's swearing. "Muckgrabber's asshole. Tie a rope around a castle bear and pull, you Algo-a-damned ghoul. I'll throw you to the hydras and start cutting heads until there are too many pieces to count. Drown in giant's blood you." Nathan stepped up next to Stella and gently poked her shoulder, interrupting the tirade. "Can you fix it?" She jumped a few inches, then shook herself. "Yeah, though I'll need to remake the force spell." She waved a hand, banishing the cracked force construct that looked vaguely like a brain made of blue glass. The mana did concentrate on the sharp corners and eventually punch through. "I think I can fix it. With the proper spell structure, I should be able to guide the lightning no matter how much there is. Benefits of understanding electrical resistance. It won't be much more guidance than a direction." "Good enough," Nathan said. "We'll keep them off you until the main force arrives." He turned back to the rest of the heirs. "We don't have much time. They probably heard Stella's spell misfiring. Koch, stay near Stella. I want her focused on rolling out the welcome mat to the main force, and you need to protect her until it arrives. Sarah, since we're staying here, you might be best served by finding a high point. Can you handle that yourself?" The tall woman nodded, then bounded up the nearby rock face. Each of her leaps looked gentle, but they rocketed her up the cliff as she moved from ledge to ledge. Then Nathan turned to Arl, now fully armored and looking like a metallic Black Panther. "We're going to move fast and break things. Listen for Stella or Kochai warning you to take cover. I don't think you want to be in the open when she sets off her new spell. I'll stay out there, though. Sounds like fun." Nathan and Arl got in position, hiding behind some broken rocks on the approach to the heir's chosen battlefield. Nathan shot glances back to where Stella was assembling her megacapacitor spell. She was doing a good job positioning it behind the outcrop. The flickering light of the mana reflected off other rocks, but he couldn't see the magical construct itself from his vantage point. After a couple of minutes, the sound of metal striking stone grew louder. He signaled to Arl, who gestured his readiness. "The first of the 8 groups has found us. We need to convince them that this won't be enough, that the rest need to bunch up into a single attack." A wave of scouts poured over the rocks, and the battle began. Nathan activated his rage and leapt from hiding to grab the tail of one and swing it like an oversized flail to smash into 2 others. He continued rampaging through the scout constructs, ripping off legs and absorbing the magic they threw his way. But there were strike constructs behind the scouts, and one barreled towards him. It was 10 feet tall and carried by 6 legs tipped with wicked spikes that slammed into the stone like jackhammers. The head was large and triangular, with a single bright eye in the center. A malevolent red light shone from the eye, and a slot opened up above it. A familiar whine sounded from the opening. It's the same launcher as those turrets from the last dungeon of Old Gemor. High-velocity metal spikes incoming. Suddenly, a high-caliber bullet penetrated the singular eye of the construct and bounced around inside the metallic body, making the enemy jerk and fall. A small external explosion showered the area with metal fragments and sent foul smoke into the air. But Nathan couldn't pay attention, as he juked a spike from another large construct, flipping himself into the air and smashing down atop a scout. The next enchanted spike glanced off his ribs at a shallow angle, leaving behind a deep graze and cracked bones that healed up in an instant. Another flanking war machine toppled from a bullet to the eye as Nathan tumbled past a few more attacks, leaping off the scout construct. He leveraged his slow fall to soar over the carpet of smaller attackers, coming down on the legs of one of the strike constructs and snapping a joint with a precise kick. Mid-tier tumbling 10 achieved. Congratulations, you have maxed out this utility skill. It cannot be improved any further. You must achieve insight into this skill to develop it to high tier. But the strike constructs were fast, well-armored, and vicious. He tried to find a weak point on the damaged enemy, but it spun and threw him back with a sweep of its sharp-tipped legs. Then the joint Nathan had broken snapped back into place, and the construct reared back on 2 legs, jabbing the other 4 limbs at him like hydraulic spears. The attacks bracketed him, and he couldn't dodge or block them all. Nathan ducked the one lunging for his head, accepting another that pierced his side. He grabbed the intrusive limb, siphoning all the mana he could from the enchanted metal. He expected the construct to pin him, but instead it reared back and flung him skywards. How come it did that? From his new vantage, Nathan understood why he'd been thrown into the air as a dozen strike constructs aimed their magical railguns up at him. He would have been a clay pigeon without slow fall to jerk him downwards and out of the path of the first few spikes that flew his way. Arl cleaved through 2 of the larger constructs while they were distracted, but the next few seconds were still a blur of motion, as Nathan spent stamina like water to avoid the cascade of metal projectiles fired his way. He jerked himself down again, and then held in place before pulling himself sideways, the motions deft because of his new agility class skill. The scout constructs were also sending volleys of magic his way, and Nathan tried to steer into those to replenish his stamina. Stamina, 25, 59, 30, 30, which is still absurdly high. High-tier slow fall 8 achieved. High-tier dodging footwork 3 achieved. Not a lot of footwork involved there, but definitely some dodging. Soon Nathan was close enough to the ground that he could accelerate freely downwards, slamming into one of the armored constructs with Davrar-enhanced momentum. Nathan's bones cracked, despite being boosted by skill, rage, and talent. The construct was pushed into the ground, but its armor held frustratingly firm as Nathan bounded away. It's 3 inches of enchanted steel. I'm not strong enough to bash through that. Yet, even if the construct's body was in one piece, his attack had clearly broken several of the enchantments that animated it. The war machine staggered drunkenly to its feet before a bullet penetrated its weakened top casing. Nathan looked around at the surviving constructs, baring his teeth as he surveyed their reduced numbers. We're winning this. I just hope Katja and Stella are doing okay. I'm a little busy here. Thank you for listening to the story on KevinAudio.com Chapter 37. Wait for it. Nathan engaged another one of the strike constructs, dodging through the blows from its armored legs to grapple with the central body. He wasn't strong enough to penetrate their smooth armor, so he'd first tried striking at the joints of their 6 legs. However, They had some kind of self-repair capability that enabled them to fix that damage. Now he was trying to drain the magic that powered the constructs. It wasn't a particularly smooth process, given they possessed 6 legs tipped with sharp blades that could crack stone, and a spike thrower more reminiscent of a railgun than a crossbow. Nathan dodged a bolt from point-blank range, wrapping himself around the bottom half of the construct. He tried to sap the magic that powered the lashing limbs first, wincing as a scout construct cut a slice from his butt with a lashing tail. He had to suppress an urge to react, to release his grip and crush the foe that had wounded him. Battle meditation saves the day. Once again, I'm busy being a magic-sucking limpet. Glad I heal so quickly, though my clothes are once again completely shot. From his position, Nathan had a good view of Arl, now dressed in his dark, form-fitting armor and wielding his new greatsword. The master of many weapons was absolutely demolishing his opponents. A spike deflected off the armor with a flash of light, though the blow made him stagger. 3 strike constructs leapt forward to take advantage, but with an elegant sweep of his blade, Arl sliced them all in half. There's some kind of spatial thing going on there. That blade shouldn't reach so far. Not sure if it's a talent of Arl's or the blade itself. He's been pretty close-lipped about his talents. The construct Nathan clung to slumped to the ground as it finally drained of magic. He rolled to his feet to see another construct bull its way into view, slower to arrive on the battlefield than the rest. While the scouts were the size of large dogs with long tails, and the strike variants closer to a delivery truck, this thing was the size of a 2-story building. The other constructs had thin metal legs holding up a larger central body that housed weapons, somewhat reminiscent of a thick-bodied spider. But this new construct seemed to be all leg, with only a small central body and 12 heavily armored legs. Each limb was about 40 feet long, 8 feet thick, and moved with unstoppable momentum. Nathan glanced back to where he'd left Katja and Stella. The mage had her back turned to the battle, arms raised and blazing with lightning. She was busy managing the hidden monocapacitors, whose flickering light reflected off the landscape around them. Katja stood in front of her, a hazy half-dome of golden light protecting him and Stella from any spells or projectiles. A scout construct charged him, and Katja crushed it almost dismissively. And I can't see Sarah. She's probably moving between positions on top of those rocks so they can't pinpoint her location. Everything's good, so long as we can keep this giant, armored spider thing from closing on them. I hope this is the only bruiser in this wave before the main force arrives and we can play our ace. Nathan squared up against the giant metal monster, which had picked up some speed now that it could see its foes. Nathan charged straight towards it. I kind of wish I'd picked up Magic Sunder Siegebreaker. This seems like the kind of foe it'd be great for. As it is, I'll need to act a little smarter. The other war constructs were giving the newest addition a wide berth, and Arl stayed back as well, taking the cue from the scattering foes. A bullet pinged off the central body, and then a field of energy fizzed into place all around the spider construct, extending 15 or so feet in every direction but down. Nathan grimaced as he entered the field. It was a familiar sensation, and not one that was pleasant. Disintegration field. There goes absolutely every speck of my clothes. It's not as strong as a disintegration beam, but it'd take apart a body in seconds, and ranged weapons don't stand a much better chance. Normally, you'd need magic to penetrate this, but that's why it's so heavily armored. Wonder how it doesn't disintegrate itself. The construct didn't act surprised that Nathan hadn't turned to dust, merely swinging several legs in a scissoring pattern that would be nearly impossible to dodge. The limbs weren't sharp or especially agile, but they moved quickly and were heavy enough to pulp a siege boar. Nathan threw himself into a high diving roll, his rage and stamina-assisted leap launching him 15 feet in the air. He twisted halfway, leaning on his new strenuous agility, in combination with tumbling to thread the needle through the creature's crushing legs. Oh, I can spend stamina with strenuous agility to generate new angular momentum while in midair. Amazing. One of the limbs clipped him in the leg and would have smashed him prone into the dirt, easy prey to be crushed by a follow-up attack. But Nathan used his movement skills in concert, stabilizing his tumble with strenuous agility, slowing down with slow fall, and landing in a smooth roll with tumbling, while dodging footwork, let him spring to his feet and dance around the follow-up attack that shattered a crater in the stone underfoot. Congratulations, you have developed the mid-tier tumbling utility skill into high-tier tumbling. Utility skill, high-tier tumbling. This skill will help you use unorthodox movements to take advantage of your momentum, especially useful to avoid attacks and compensate when you are struck. Then Nathan was beneath the construct, at the very nexus of its disintegration aura. From here he could see mana conduits threading along the bottom of each of the machine's legs, guiding and controlling the disintegration spell. The conduits terminated in a greenish-black crystal on the underside of the body, which pulsed in time to the aura. It's always a fucking crystal. Well, time to employ the patented Nathan crystal response tactic. Without thinking about it too hard, Nathan crouched and leapt, grabbing hold of the central body with his left hand while he punched at the crystal with his right. It cracked with a surprisingly deep sound, and the spider construct jerked and whined mechanically. It retracted the crystal into the central body, trying to fold an armored panel across the opening. Nathan wedged his shoulder into the gap as his arm groped around the robot's exposed innards, draining magic from every part he touched. The creature pulsed the disintegration aura fiercely, even as the crystal's surface glazed with cracks. It looked one light tap away from shattering, but the spell blazed right in Nathan's face. Hair burned off all over his body and his eyeballs itched, but his skin was inviolable. Damn. Improved anti-magic is pretty great. Nathan's shoulder was being crushed by the vice-like strength of the closing panel, but he was getting more than enough stamina to stay topped up from both the disintegrating aura and the immensely magical guts of the construct. It's almost like curse breaking, except the entire thing is an enormous mobile curse. Now I just have to shred this enchanted giant from the inside out. Then Nathan's questing hand found the motherlode of magic, some kind of circuit directly connected to what had to be the construct's brain. His magical senses spread through the link as the mana swirled into him. The central control unit for this thing was complicated. Nathan tried to understand how it worked, what its priorities were. But it was like trying to understand code by looking at hardware activation. That Nathan's anti-magic was destroying the underlying framework like a spreading acid also didn't help. Even so, he felt a sense of panic from the construct. There was some form of awareness in there, though it didn't seem to be on the level of a human. Nathan suppressed a flash of pity for the thing. High-tier Identify 4 achieved. It's a war construct from a long-dead empire that's been unleashed on Gemor. It's attacking a town and unwilling to cooperate. Pity it all you like, but it needs to be put down. The creature's long legs had tried to curl enough to hit Nathan during this process, but their armor meant they lacked the flexibility to reach the central body. Now they were jerking spasmodically, and as the rapid-fire thoughts of the magical brain were disrupted, they stopped altogether. The construct didn't topple, seemingly locked in place. Nathan extracted his arm and vaulted atop the frozen body, using its 20-foot height to survey the battlefield. Arl had just mopped up the last of the scout constructs as they tried to swarm him, blasting a pack of them back with the lightning saber. Six-legged strike constructs lay slumped across the battlefield, either shot precisely through the eye by Sarah or diced to pieces by Arl's new disintegration sword. Stella and Kachai sheltered beyond the construct carnage, though Stella was now limned by a bright aura of flickering lightning. The monocapacitors were still hidden behind a stone outcrop, but the blue-white light reflected from the surrounding hills, as if Stella's spell was a hidden but unimaginably powerful disco ball. The pair were surrounded by the pulped remains of scout constructs and a single larger strike construct that had tried to go for Stella and met Kachai's hammer. That's a weird shape for metal to take. Oh yeah, Kachai's new hammer deforms metal. Nathan turned in the other direction, looking over the hillside that sloped down to the valley around Taryn. Oh shit, that's a lot of constructs. A goddamn army just like we planned for. They hadn't gotten all of the war machines from this wave, and a number of them were retreating to join the encroaching horde. And it was a horde. The spider-like scouts covered the slope like an angry metal carpet, punctuated by maybe 100 of the strike constructs. There were 9 more of the giant 12-legged armored creatures like the one Nathan was using as a watchtower, but most worrying were 4 even larger machines that looked like giant metal bricks, each supported by 8 stubby legs that carried them across the ground slowly but steadily. Not sure I want to know what those do. Here's hoping Stella's lightning can take them out and I never find out. Nathan turned to yell to the rest of the heirs, shouting as loud as he could. Incoming horde. We've got a couple minutes. Get to cover. I'll try to get them to bunch up. He was interrupted by the loud hiss of an incoming spell before the construct he was standing on was nearly vaporized by an explosion. Nathan was thrown into the air as shrapnel from his former perch sliced into his skin, shredding his lower body. Pieces of enchanted metal embedded themselves in his legs and gut, and his right arm was torn half off by a particularly large chunk of enchanted armor. Rude. I was talking. Lines of shockingly powerful light mana locked onto him, staying precisely focused and on target no matter how he adjusted his trajectory. Nathan stabilized his spin and slowed his fall to look down on the encroaching horde. Each of the light spells focused on him was powerful enough to melt metal, but they felt about as impactful as a hairdryer pointed at his skin, and they'll provide enough stamina to heal through all that shrapnel. Need to keep in mind that even if an explosion is caused by magic, any material it propels can still hurt me, despite me being safe from the blast wave. Weird. Nathan had to pay attention to ensure the alien objects were ejected from his body. Thanks to his skills, he could focus past the pain, the hostile spells, and the fact that he was fatally wounded and hovering over an AI alarmist's worst nightmare. He cataloged his injuries and focused his healing on pushing out the foreign pieces of metal, giving his body the attention it needed to restore itself. Battle Meditation 4 achieved. Perfected Body 4 achieved. Now in better condition and still hovering over the battlefield, Nathan surveyed the army in front of him. It was still some distance away, though steadily closing the gap. The light beams were emanating from the corners of the brick constructs, their aim and range impressive. A hatch in the center of the closest brick opened up, and a ball of condensed, purple plasma zipped out of it. Nathan felt a targeting spell lock onto him, but it slid off and he juked sideways. The ball of plasma flew off into the distance before exploding like a battleship shell against a far-off hill. Then the strike constructs opened up with their spike throwers, and Nathan had to dive for the deck, yanking himself down with slow fall to avoid the staggered volley of projectiles. I'm immune to magic, not metal spikes, though if I keep leveling up and empowering unarmored resilience and raging thrill, that'll change. Nathan broke line of sight to the attackers, falling behind the hill crest that still blocked the army from the heirs. He confirmed that the rest of the heirs had regrouped, with Sarah and Arl standing next to Koch as he maintained the half-dome of golden force. Stella was still turned around, and Nathan wondered if he should signal to her when it was time to unleash her spell. "No, I trust my teammates to handle it. They'll get it done. My job is to prevent the smaller constructs from overwhelming them until we get as much of the army in range as possible. Let's hope this works. Soon enough, the outriders from the swarm piled over the hill, and Nathan engaged them. He slammed his fist through the weaker armor of a scout, grabbing a barbed tail headed for his neck and using the attached construct as a bludgeon. A strike construct crested the hill and aimed at him, but Sarah fired first, and the metal figure dropped like a puppet with its strings cut. Then 3 more came into view while Nathan was tied down with a crowd of scouts. One of them shot a spike at him as the other 2 fired on Kache's dome. The projectiles deflected with faint ripples of golden force, pinging off into the hillside beyond. Sarah fired again, dropping another construct. Arl stood next to her, looking frustrated but ready to deal with anything that reached the shield. Then the construct stopped, withdrawing from Nathan and forming a battle line at the crest of the hill. Sarah shot another strike construct and the last one withdrew, hiding behind some rocks. The scout constructs remained, seemingly daring the headshot gunslinger to waste ammunition on them. She proceeded to do so, firing as quickly as she could reload the masterwork rifle to scythe through their ranks. I'm glad the new one is enchanted to not overheat. I wonder if she's getting back more focus than she's spending on that ammunition. Probably not, but she's been stockpiling. Nathan eyed the line of scout constructs as more shuffled atop the hill to replace those Sarah had shot. They're waiting for the heavy hitters to arrive. The scout and sentry constructs are fast, but they aren't the heavy combat units. The brick-shaped ones are probably for direct fire support, and the 12-legged armored spiders are line breakers, or wall breakers. That disintegration aura is potent. Sarah continued to harvest the scout constructs in view as they kept an eye on the airs, when Nathan saw the first telltale silhouette of one of the giant spider constructs come into view. Nothing was visible except for its heavily armored legs, and it was clear that Sarah couldn't take it out from afar. Sounds like a job for me. We need to get them to commit everything. The sentry constructs gave the spider a wide berth, and Nathan jogged sideways to put himself in between it and the airs. The construct slowed for a second, and Nathan could almost feel its attention shifting between him and the pile of jagged scrap which was all that remained of an identical war machine. Yeah, that's right. Bring it. It decided not to bring it. Nathan engaged in a short staring contest with the 60-foot-wide, 12-legged metal spider, and wondered when his life had gotten so strange. Probably around when I got yanked through a portal to a fantasy world. But there've been a few additional weird steps to get exactly here. Then 3 more of the spiders came over the hill, and Nathan started backpedaling. He wanted to slow them down, convince them to commit more of their firepower, not try to take them all out single-handedly. I mean, if I could, then sure, that would be great. But I got a bit lucky not getting pounded to paste by the first one, and my impression of their intelligence is that they're smart enough to work together and prevent me from doing the same thing again. They might not give me a straight shot to the core this time. I might be stuck slowly disenchanting and ripping off individual pieces of armor. No, I'm mostly reduced to posturing right now. The constructs were still advancing cautiously, fanning out across the slope of the hill and matching Nathan's backward steps with their own. They were soon joined by other spider constructs, until a line of 8 slowly advanced. Sarah's shots dwindled as groups of the smaller scouts hid behind each spider construct, using them as cover. They could definitely just charge, and there's not much we could really do. Well, aside from unleashing Stella's surprise. Are they waiting for? The spider constructs picked up their pace, with scout and strike constructs pouring over the hillside behind them in a wave. Then the top of 4 brick-shaped constructs crested the hill, and the swarm's advance turned into a charge. Nathan wasn't too far away from the airs, and he leapt into the air like a baseman trying to catch a high line drive. Only what he was catching this time was an explosive plasma projectile aimed at his teammates. It was about the same size as a baseball, though it didn't stay that way for long. The ball of sun-hot plasma detonated in his fingers, and Nathan was very glad for improved anti-magic as the raging explosion washed over him. Another ball of plasma streaked by and collided with Kacha's shield, hiding the heirs behind a roiling ball of purple fire. What is Stella waiting for? I know Kachai's shields got a lot stronger after his level 81 development and all those divinity shenanigans, but wait much longer and we'll have giant disintegration spiders knocking on our front door. The fire cleared, revealing the barrier intact and the heirs safe behind it. Kachai was on one knee, hands clasped in prayer as his shield of golden energy blazed. Stella had turned around to inspect the battlefield. Her eyes flashed with lightning that extended off the side of her face, like the brightest and most dramatic winged eyeliner imaginable. Then incandescent beams of light mana struck the barrier, and Stella smiled. Chapter 39. When the cavalry wears the face of a foe. Stella spent a good deal of the trip down the hill complaining about running out of mana. Her increased channeling rate had let her dump almost 12,000 mana into Arl's new armor, which grew shinier and more responsive as it charged up. Earlier it had looked like a tight-fitting dark robe with a metallic glint, decorated with dark gold symbols. Now it shone with a deep silver luster, and the golden symbols glowed slightly. It looked like some kind of futuristic techno-magic power armor, and that's basically what it is. It just came from a civilization that died thousands of years ago. Really, Stella was just annoyed she hadn't been able to take a nap, though she agreed that it would be wiser and more practical to rest in Terran. Beyond being protected, they'd have comforts like beds and hot food. And a bath. I'm pretty dusty, though I think the disintegration treatment did some nice exfoliation and cleaning. But we're still hiking across a desert, so it's not like I can avoid getting sweaty and dusty. Stella had been cheered up seeing the magical crystals Nathan had brought her from the spider constructs. They appeared to be a synthetic conductive quartz. It apparently wasn't very high quality, but each one was almost the size of Stella's torso. Nathan managed to fetch 6 from the wreckage of the spider constructs. He'd looked for any crystals from the brick constructs too. He bet they'd have some good ones, given the power of their magical firepower and shields. But he hadn't found anything, just scraps of metal embedded in large craters. The heirs only saw a few constructs as they descended the hill. All were at quite a distance, either retreating or keeping watch from the eastern hills. Sarah aimed her rifle at them but didn't end up firing. Too far, and they're mostly scout constructs. I don't think I could hit the eye of a strike construct from here. As the heirs passed by the destroyed remains of the siege construct that Sarah had blown up with a long-distance shot, it was clear they were also being watched from the town. Dozens of heads poked visibly over the battlements, barely larger than specks from this distance. Nathan looked up the slope at the town of Terran. Damn, that siege construct has some range. Terran's high up, and now we gotta climb the hill. Stella rolled her eyes, stretching and looking generally exhausted. Yeah, complain all you want, Stamina Man. You don't even get properly tired anymore so long as I hit you with a lightning bolt. The rest of us feel this travel. They trooped up the road, which switchbacked up the massive arch of stone that connected to the top of the mesa. The road had been deeply carved into the rock to ascend the nearly sheer cliff, in some cases almost crossing back over itself. Partway up the path, the road became slick with blood and covered with dozens of goat carcasses. They were like the ones he'd seen south of Cromer, big animals with 4 large horns and matted hair. It looked like the constructs had caught the herd as it was being driven up the road and promptly massacred them. Nathan didn't see the bodies of any shepherds. He hoped they'd made it to safety. The heirs picked their way past the bodies, climbing to the top of the slope where the road led across the narrow arch to the gatehouse, still nearly a quarter-mile away. The road was about 20 feet wide but dropped off more than 1,000 feet on both sides. A few immobile constructs lay scattered along the road's length, with more smashed along the rocks below. What is it with Gemoran Heights? I'm glad I have slow fall, or I would feel a lot more apprehensive about this. Adventurers approaching. Kachai's voice boomed across the landscape, clearly assisted by a spell. After a moment it echoed back from the mesa wall before them. The response was just as loud. Approach clear, true aim you have there. Are you the heirs? It sounded like an older man, his voice rough with age. Kachai raised an eyebrow as he replied. Indeed we are, on approach. The heirs walked across the road on top of the arch, and Nathan saw the gatehouse clearly. It was a sturdy construction, blocking the end of the arch from the town beyond. It was also clearly in bad shape, having taken several fireballs from the constructs, which had destabilized the towers and partially broken in the wide gate. More dead constructs were visible around the gatehouse, scattered around the base as if they'd been killed trying to climb the structure. There were a mix of scout and strike models, and they formed a small pile in front of the gate. Muckgrabber's filthy asshole. Sarah's quiet swear drew Nathan's attention, and she pointed to the top of the gatehouse where their reception committee awaited. Oh shit, that's Simla. And Khazar, his uncle, the one who stood for Simla during the solstice, who wanted an excuse to challenge Sudriel to a duel. Out of the corner of his mouth, Nathan spoke to Stella. You sent a message to Gemor saying that we beat the siege and are entering the town, right? She nodded back, eyes fixed on the adventurers atop the gatehouse. Yup, and I'm ready to cast a shield if any of them decide to be a ghoul's uncle. The pale mage to Khazar's left is Argan Schatz, an exile from Litcliffe who joined Khazar's team. He's a powerful water mage. Kachai looked back, eyebrows angled down in a severe expression. They are fellow adventurers, do not suspect bloody intentions without cause. They might think they have cause, Arl answered wryly, given what happened at the solstice, and what came of it and all the way out here. Kachai's tone was cutting, though it stayed quiet. They might hear you, be silent. The heirs walked the remaining distance in tense silence, and Nathan studied those awaiting them. There were 3 distinct clusters atop the wall. The first was 8 adventurers led by Khazar, including Simla and his team. But there was another group of adventurers, 4 older people who stood separate and 1 younger mage. Nathan remembered seeing them at the solstice but couldn't recall any details. At least they're standing apart from Khazar and Simla. The final group were clearly villagers, all suited for combat. A mixed batch of men and women with assorted slings, spears, and other weapons bulked out the mess of fighters atop the wall. And while the villagers outnumbered the adventurers 5 to 1, Nathan knew that it was the adventurers who had carried the defense of the town. The villagers probably have some combat skills, but they don't make a profession of violence like we do. As the heirs got closer, Khazar called down to them. Any constructs hiding on the road? Kachai called back, pitching his voice respectfully. No holdouts. They've retreated to the eastern hills. The old man nodded, pursing his lips before gesturing with his handful of javelins to Simla. Nephew, open the gates. The mage standing by Simla's side cast a spell, and the entire group of younger adventurers hopped off the backside of the wall. A moment later the gate creaked open, abused hinges protesting the movement before revealing Simla, and 3 of his teammates straining against the bent metal. Those constructs really did a number on the gate. I'm impressed it moves at all, but Simla and his team probably have strength enhancements from Davrar. The heirs trooped into the city, warily passing a glowering Simla. Nathan was expecting some kind of snide remark from the beautifully armored young man, but received only silence. Then one of the watching villagers raised their voice, speaking with a thick accent. A cheer for Tha heirs, them who saved Terran. If giants wake, they'll put 'em down. The villagers all gave a shout, and the heirs felt welcomed. Nathan looked back and saw Simla wince, as if he'd taken a painful blow. An hour later, Nathan and Kachai were sitting in the common room of the adventurer barracks in Taran. Stella, Arl, and Sarah had all crashed in a small bunk room, with Stella passing out as soon as they'd gotten some food in her and pushed her towards a bed. Nathan and Kachai weren't that tired, though for different reasons. Apparently one of Kachai's new class skills gave him better endurance and decreased his need for physical resources. He'd phrased it as a step closer to divinity. Meanwhile, Nathan's enormous pool of stamina and perfected body protected him from the symptoms of exhaustion. He gazed off into space, wondering if he could use his talent to substitute for sleep. Probably for a little while, though I shouldn't make the shift sudden or permanent. Maybe try sleeping only a few hours a night, then skip every other night while keeping track of how I feel. I don't know enough neuroscience to be comfortable making permanent changes, but I can clean out sleep toxins to alleviate some of the issues. It's important to stay alert right now. Nathan grimaced. He and Kachai weren't explicitly awake in case any of the other adventurers tried anything, but there was a reason they were both sitting here, keeping an eye on the entrance to the room where the rest of the heirs slept. The worst part is that Khazar is explicitly in charge. He's the leader of the strongest team here, no question. The only way to dispute that would be with a direct challenge. And he's an elite adventurer, so there's no way that works out well for me. The door opened, and Nathan tensed as 5 figures filed in. They were the third group of adventurers, whom Nathan had seen atop the wall but not recognized. There were 4 grizzled older men and women, each dressed in blackened breastplates and carrying 6 wicked daggers. The 5th member was a young, nulled woman who was obviously a mage. That's not an uncommon pattern. I saw it with the Blades of Steel too, back when they relieved us at Bridgeguard. A recent graduate of the Tower of Trickery joining a team of older adventurers who are battle-scarred and experienced but lacking magical support. 2 of the new arrivals went into the kitchen and started preparing food with the stocks left to them by the villagers, while another came and sat down near Nathan and Kachai. He introduced himself in a rumbling voice. "I'm Delric Ernesto, and I lead the Old Hands." He gestured to the other adventurers in the room. "Good to have you here." Then Delric snorted, mouth twisting wryly as he shook his head. "More than good. You wiped out that Ending's damned army of old Gemor. We saw the lightning from here, impressive as dragon's breath." I'm sure Stella would love to hear that compliment. Nathan and Kachai both gave the man respectful nods, though Kachai was the one to speak. "We arrived in time and are free of all regret." Delric nodded absent-mindedly, barely acknowledging Kachai's words. He cast his eyes towards the door. "I was at the solstice. I know there's smoke and blood between you and Simla. With Khazar here, you're no fools to be suspicious, but don't be. Gemor knows what occurred and we won't let any dark tricks pass." The grizzled man took a deep breath and cracked a wide grin. "But let's not smother our fire any more than needed. We're alive today and hope to be alive tomorrow. After the town defense is put to rights, we'll track the war constructs back to the foundry fortress that spawned them. Why not wait for more adventurers?" Nathan asked. "There was an all-adventurer call. Surely more are on the way." "The Dust Eaters are close, though they're under strength. They lost their leader recently, from what I understand. Remember till ending." Nathan grimaced, dipping his head in acknowledgement and echoing the older man. "Remember till ending. We were there for Nornan's death, a nest of ashblood cobras." Delric bowed his head at Nathan's point. "Dangerous foes. But we can't give the foundry fortress time to make more constructs. They make an army a day when fully active. Another team of adventurers isn't worth a delay. You should rest and we'll leave in the evening. The Dust Eaters will arrive in the night to protect Taran." Nathan traded glances with Kachai, the unspoken question clear. The divine Justicar shook his head. We will remain awake. Neither of us have much need for sleep." The door opened again, and Khazar led the way into the room, trailed by Simla and both teams of adventurers. The old man was built like a castle wall, dark skin, wrinkled but with muscles flexing underneath like bands of iron. His finely trimmed salt-and-pepper beard matched the black enameled silver armor that looked like a masterpiece of an enchanter's craft, but not as cool as Arl's new armor. The old adventurer sat at a table near them, barking out orders to his team. "The villagers will put what remains to right. We leave at sundown. Eat, rest, do what needs done. Simla, attend me." Simla sat down across from his uncle, and the family resemblance was clear. Khazar glanced over at Nathan, meeting his gaze with a smoldering intensity that prompted Nathan to quickly break eye contact and look down at the table. He's probably over level 500, an elite of Gemor, somebody who spent their life in violence. Not a great enemy to have. But I'm not going to run from him either. Nathan's introspection was interrupted by Khazar's voice, directed at Simla but clearly pitched to carry throughout the room. "Simla, my nephew, the inheritor of the Bola, you are the young champion of the traditionalists. Are you proud?" Out of the corner of his eye, Nathan saw Simla puff up, lifting his chin and meeting his uncle's gaze with an air of trepidation. "Yes, uncle. I am proud to represent the traditionalists among my generation." Khazar's response was a whip crack, harsh and scourging. "Why are you proud? You fail to represent us. Behold the heirs." His arm flashed out to point unwaveringly at Nathan and Kache. The old man's voice became a rolling boulder, gravelly and overpowering. "They represent Sudriel, and her plans strike their targets. And why should they not? Her representatives slay giants, and you struggle with mere men." Nathan's eyebrows vaulted towards his hairline, and he caught Kache's gaze to share the awkwardness. "Why are they arguing about this here, in front of us?" Simla flinched but opened his mouth to respond. Khazar rolled right over him, his voice burying anything Simla said. "The adventurers need freedom from rules. They need not be restrained by the villages. We must become stronger. That is what we say, and it is true. But how does it appear to the undecided when those who follow the guildmistress rules are so strong as to end a nest of ashblood cobras, clear an Edrani dungeon, and save a village in the span of a week?" Simla's jaw was set, his temper up. "You saw the lightning. It was some artifact from the dungeon. Strength stolen, not their own. Any could do such a thing." Khazar's voice was venomous. "Then steal some strength for yourself. You were approved for a dungeon delve on my word, and you did not succeed. You have not reached level 81. You are a disgrace of an adventurer." Simla's voice was quiet but held a core of steel. "The dungeon was beyond us. It was retreat or die. There was no nemesis we could slay in that tower of lies and poison." Khazar's hand hit the table with a loud thwack, leaving a crack through the slab of stone. "There is always another option. Find it and level, or die, or else the heirs will carry the day again." Simla's head swung towards where Nathan and Kache were sitting. Nathan was watching out of the corner of his eye, but he could easily see the burning venom in the young man's gaze. "Oh, that's why we're here. To help Khazar humiliate Simla and push him harder. He's going to get Simla killed. You know what? Fuck it. I don't have to play my role in this script. If I'm too offensive, Khazar can challenge me, but with our relative ranks, it'd need to be a damned heavy offense. And Simla stands less of a chance against me now than he did on the solstice." Nathan brought his head up, meeting Simla's eyes. "You swore to protect Gemor. We swore more than that. Someday we'll be gone, dead, or traveling to meet the endings, but Gemor will always need competent adventurers, people who can fight and fight well, adventurers who can defend the villages against the threats of Davrar." Khazar hissed derisively, but Nathan ignored him, keeping his eyes on Simla. "Your path is your own. Don't let an old man make his failings your own. Fight for yourself, Simla Bola. You saved lives here because you retreated from that dungeon and kept your team alive. What is worth more, those lives or your pride?" "His pride." Nathan tilted his head towards Khazar. The old adventurer's words filled the room, trembling with cold rage. "Do you mean those words, boy? Do hold your own pride highest, then tell my nephew it's no loss if he's lesser." Nathan met Khazar's eyes and almost flinched. The man's lips were peeled back in a snarl, and his eyes were like whorled pits into a realm of horrors. To meet the man's gaze was to understand a threat of implicit violence, so deeply it reached back and yanked on Nathan's brainstem. "Fuck, I think he's got a skill like intimidation, or something similar. Good thing I can resist mind-affecting skills while raging thanks to anti-mage impassivity." Nathan let loose the leash on his rage, focusing his thoughts to keep his expression mild. The strength that flowed through his muscles was mirrored by the resolve that bolstered his thoughts, and he met Khazar's eyes and leaned forward. Nathan's voice was resolved as he met Khazar's skill with one of his own. "I meant what I said. We don't need to be at each other's throats. Improve to protect, not to compete. Davrar's dangerous enough without us fighting each other." High-tier earnestness 9 achieved. "Why am I defending Simla? He tried to kill me in a non-lethal duel. But I hate seeing somebody like Khazar being abusive. Simla's an asshole, but it's not hard to blame his role model for that." Nathan stood suddenly as Khazar opened his mouth to reply, the rapid motion drawing the eyes of everybody who hadn't already been paying full attention to the conversation. "I'm going back to our room. I need to get out of here before I do something we'll regret. Even with battle meditation and the old hands here, I have the feeling this is a rather dangerous situation, and I'm not making it better." Kachai nodded his approval, and Nathan ran away from a fight he was convinced he couldn't win. Chapter 40. To end a swarm. Sarah and Stella woke from their naps before long, and Nathan filled them in on his tense exchange with Khazar. He narrowed his eyes at Stella. Did Simla's team set off the old Gemor constructs? He mentioned he retreated from a dungeon. Stella shrugged. "I will ask. Siltal didn't say anything. She sent a message, getting a response in just a few minutes." "Nope. Simla's team went into a smaller fortress of the face just north of here. Nothing to do with old Gemor. Nobody delved any dungeons to the east of Taran. No known cause." Nathan frowned, thinking. "It couldn't have been us, even if the crystal did send out a message before I broke it. That was an Edrani dungeon, and these are old Gemor constructs. They shouldn't talk to each other." An early warning sign of the endings. Arl slapped Nathan on the back, his armored hand striking with surprising weight. "I bet dragon bones to stalker teeth that we never find out Davrar's dangers don't always have a reason. Let's get ready, it is time to depart soon." Sarah cast a look around the sparse room. "Not much left to do to get ready. Stella, are you recovered?" The short mage stretched, then cracked her neck. "I'll sling lightning bolts all day long, but maybe a day or 3 before I cast that spell again. My head is sore. A lot of me is sore." Kachai opened the door, taking in the airs and their readiness, and jerked his head. "It's time to depart." They filed out the door, sticking close to Delric and the old hands as the various teams assembled in the village square. No work appeared to be getting done, and the villagers were out in force, watching the gathered adventurers in silence. Nathan noted the extensive animal pens which held several herds of the extra-demonic-looking goats. Separating the livestock from the houses were a series of warehouses resembling tanneries and workshops. I thought tanneries were supposed to smell bad. Maybe some skills can prevent those problems. Soon enough, all of the adventurers were gathered, and Nathan watched as Khazar spoke to the leader of the village. "We leave to slay this nemesis, and will return when the threat is vanquished for a feast. You small folk should have no fear." He clapped the wizened man on the shoulder before striding out the gates. Nathan could swear that the villagers looked annoyed at Khazar's terms of address and presumption of their hospitality. He gave them an apologetic shrug, but wasn't convinced the message came across. The group of adventurers followed Khazar out of town, with Nathan and the heirs bringing up the rear. The old hands were in the middle, while Khazar and Simla's teams led the way. The company was 18 strong, and they strung out somewhat as they descended the winding road from the heights of Terran to the desert floor. As they walked, the mage from the old hands dropped back to talk to the heirs. She was a nulled girl, 3 feet tall and nearly lost in an elaborately tailored deep blue robe that matched her hair. Her skin was an umber color, closer to red than the orange of most nulls. She bore a staff capped with a giant red crystal just a few shades lighter than her skin. She sidled up next to Stella, glancing sidelong. "That lightning, was that you?" "Who's asking?" Stella looked amusedly back, cocking an eyebrow. The nulled mage blushed, ducking her head. "1,000 apologies, I'm Netta Helvim, graduate of the Tower of Trickery. I have fire mana, but hear me, I want lightning mana, especially if you can destroy an army with it. Your spell outshone the sun." She'd started out speaking quietly, but her excitement ramped up over time. Stella shot Nathan a diverting glance, then turned back to Netta. "It's hard and takes powerful insights, but tell me about your fire magic." Nathan listened as Stella chatted with the other mage, quickly falling into a banter about the specifics of spells. Netta had shadow mana in addition to fire and was working on figuring out spells that combined the two, since they weren't a common mana pairing. Night fell as the adventurers walked across the desert. A member of Khazar's team with a tracking skill took the lead, following the constructs that had fled earlier in the day. The change from day to night seemed unusually sudden, and Nathan looked up at the sky to see if anything strange was going on. He found himself frowning at a patch of clouds, some of which seemed to have a different pattern than the rest. "That cloud seems kind of hazy. Weird. Hey Sarah, do you see anything up there?" Nathan pointed, careful to keep his finger directly aligned with his target. The headshot gunslinger squinted up at where Nathan was pointing, tilting her head back and forth for nearly 20 seconds. She shrugged. "Nothing. What do you see?" Nathan shook his head. "Nothing. There aren't any flying old Gemor war constructs, right?" Arl was the one who answered while squinting up at the dark patch of sky. "Nope. All ground-based. We've seen most of them. Artillery, support, siegebreaker, strike, scout, sentry. I think the only one left is the tunneler and their specialist." They walked through the night as the two mages continued to chat. After nearly an hour, Netta shook herself and took several steps back from Stella. "Stalkers take me, I didn't mean to ask so many questions. I would owe you a small favor for this." Stella just shook her head. "No, you don't. We're just talking about magic. Isn't it amazing?" Yes, it is. And your fire spell forms, exquisite." Netta gave out a small sigh, gazing at Stella in admiration. "But you're saying I can use shadow to prevent harmful backdrafts. Such a good term, and guide airflow." Delric had also dropped back and was watching Netta with a fond expression. Nathan walked over to the older adventurer to ask a question that had been on his mind for some time. "You are the second team that has a few older, veteran adventurers and then a single, younger mage. Is there a reason for that? Plain as clean water, isn't it?" Delric pursed his lips, taking the time to answer Nathan properly. "There haven't been many mages in Gemor. Now Gale Shullet has set up a proper tower of magery and is sharing her insights. Any team worth their steel will welcome a mage who can cast message, let alone other spells. Netta can cast basic illusion, darkness, and fire orb. She solves problems with a snap that leave those with steel petrified in place." The older adventurer shook his head in wonder. "Gemor is growing a magic of its own, and I am glad of it. I remember the days where there was no coordination, no management. Tenby would send out a call and get 4 teams, while Nedrang would get none, losing their shepherds and flocks besides. With more teams having message, we can control delve days and establish villages farther out. Having a mage gives you options, lets you fight smart. 2 weeks ago, we trapped a siegeboar titan by digging an ending's damned pit. Netta covered it with shadow, then we lured the titan over the trap." He reached back, struggling to massage his back under his armor. Every other time I've fought one of those brutes, somebody died or nearly died. This time I pulled a muscle from the digging." Khazar's voice sounded from the front of the pack of adventurers, stern and admonishing. "Keep your mouths shut and your eyes outwards. We travel hostile territory, act like it, you muck-grabber leavings." "Yeah, and your yelling was real stealthy." Nathan shared a resigned nod with Delric, and they trotted to the edges of the formation, keeping watch as the adventurers traveled through the night. The Foundry Fortress looked familiar to Nathan, like something he'd seen in a video game. It was a triangular cave cut into the side of a mountain, with a long flat side of the triangle against the ground and the other two edges rising to a shallow point. The inside of the cave looked made of metal, and magic faintly billowed from the opening. That doesn't look much like a traditional fortress, but the longer Nathan examined the fortress, the more defenses he saw. Several portions of the cliff around the cave entrance were definitely covered with illusions, and as Nathan squinted through the concealing magic, he could see that they guarded magical artillery emplacements. More illusions covered a multi-layered network of trenches that secured every approach. Except instead of man-sized trenches, these were sized for tanks, or constructs, I suppose. The adventurers were hidden in a slight valley that was above their target, with an illusion from Netta disguising their approach. It was a good place to observe from without being observed, but there was only one approach to the Foundry Fortress, and it was definitely heavily defended. Nathan walked over to where Khazar was conferring with Simla and Argan. Argan was apparently a water mage, though he was frowning down at the cave and pointing in the rough direction of the trenches. "Something down there, but I'm not sure what. The entire entrance might be an illusion." Nobody from the heirs had been called over, though Delric and Netta were standing nearby. They'd come to give their input, though it hadn't been asked for yet. Nathan wasn't waiting. He walked up next to Khazar and pointed. "Entrance is real. There are trenches, about 20 feet across, running from there to there. I can't see how deep they are, but there are definitely constructs in them. There are 5 magical emplacements in the cliff, 1 big, 2 medium, and 2 small." He pointed out each feature in turn. "There's a support construct right in front of the cave, a bit to the left. You know, the big brick-like ones with light beams and explosive spells. Tier Notice 4 achieved." Khazar turned to Nathan and his eyebrows drew down. "And why," he asked dryly, "should I believe you know a construct from a muck-grabber's asshole?" Argan held up a calming hand to Khazar, then turned to Nathan. His accented tone was skeptical but not as hostile as the leader of their expedition. "Aren't we all aware that our friend here enjoys a rather special relationship with magic? Is it not possible that he can pierce these illusions? And he and the heirs have defeated many constructs. Perhaps it is worth a test to see how reliable his input is." Khazar frowned. "You can tear away those illusions from here, Argan. Then we reduce them from range, charge in and break the core. Simple done. No need to rely on uncertain advantages." The water mage blinked slowly and flipped his hands as if to indicate disinterest. "Indeed, but we'll be under attack from many sources. Should we depend on the child of the Caxals to shield us from the magical barrage that follows? Why not take the chance to eliminate the heaviest ranged combatant before the battle is joined? Argan talks in questions a lot. I wonder if that's a Litcliffe thing or just him." Khazar sighed heavily, blowing air through his nose. He glowered over at Nathan. "Point out the support construct, carefully. If I miss, you owe me the price of one of these." He held out one of the enchanted javelins in his fist, and Nathan frowned. "I'm not sure that's entirely fair, but whatever. I don't want anybody here to eat one of those plasma balls." Nathan pointed out the position of the wavy rectangular object he was pretty sure was a support construct from a few different angles. Argan made a few lines of water that faintly glistened in the blue light coming from the sky overhead, and Nathan corrected them until he was confident they triangulated the blocky shape accurately. "Good thing it's literally the size of a barn." Khazar squinted out into the darkness, seemingly dissatisfied with the turn of events, but unwilling to back down in front of the audience. He judged the distance before turning to address the gathered adventurers in a low voice. "I strike first if this blasphemous guidance works. Then Argon strips the illusions. Mages defend us from afar. Argon drive them from their trenches. Ranged fighters take out constructs from here. Everybody else protects us if they close. Once we've reduced them or they've withdrawn, we proceed down the slope and towards the entrance. Then the Gleaming Fist will enter and end this swarm." Yup, his team is named the Gleaming Fist. I'd call that name pretentious, but my friend's parents are the guardians of Gemor. Khazar turned and drew back his arm. It blurred forward and there was a crack of displaced air, as if a gun had been fired. Below, Nathan saw the reflective, hexagonal shield of the support construct kindle to life in an instant to catch the javelin. But it wasn't a perfect hexagon. There was a hole in the center, where the projectile had pierced straight through. For a moment nothing happened, and suddenly there was an explosion as the support construct detonated. I guess they're just prone to blowing up. Not surprising that something firing balls of plasma has some explosive energy inside, though not as big of a boom as when Stella unleashed Thor's wrath earlier. Argon was already swinging his arms in scooping motions, and Nathan saw a huge whip of fog slowly follow his gesture. It swept across the valley like a tide, washing over the fortifications. No harm was done, but all illusions, nettas, and the fortress foundries were stripped away. The layered defenses were revealed to the naked eye. Khazar had moved quickly, before many of the adventurers were ready, so Stella didn't have a shield up. But Netta reacted in time, throwing up some sort of spell that blocked sight in one direction. The adventurers could see through it with only a bit of difficulty, and it clearly prevented their foes from aiming accurately at them, given that the counterfire of metal spikes peppered a large area. One of Simla's teammates went down, an unlucky spike skewering through his stomach. Kachai stepped over to heal him up as Stella established her shields just in time to block a plasma ball and several beams of light from the weapon emplacements on the cliff. Sarah and the other adventurers skilled at ranged combat pulled out their weapons and engaged. The strike constructs popped above their trenches only to fire a spike before ducking back into cover, so it wasn't an easy engagement. Netta did her best to divert the attacks, but with so many projectiles her illusion kept getting shredded. Another plasma ball detonated on Stella's shield. She grunted in frustration and with a faint tinge of pain. Then Khazar's arm whipped forward again, and the emplacement that had been the source of the plasma detonated. Is he using explosive javelins? No wonder he wanted Herden to enchant more for him if he uses them like this. Argon and the mage from Simla's team joined forces to conjure water into the trenches, slowly driving the constructs out of the fortifications lest the conjured water tear them apart in its vicious currents. Khazar's arm was a blur as he threw unenchanted javelins like a machine gun, each smashing apart a strike construct in a spray of metal. Stella spoke through gritted teeth. "Nobody is going to deal with the light. Fine, I'll do it." Her eyes crackled with lightning and her shield visibly flared as it accumulated an electric charge. The potential built up for a moment, and the adventurers hunkered underneath the broad barrier flinched back, hesitant of arcing tendrils of lightning coming off their overhead cover. Then the lightning roared down the twin beams of light still attempting to burn their way through the shield. They grounded themselves against the emplacements on the cliff, which blackened and cracked before falling silent. Stella gave a satisfied grunt, then swayed and fell. Her shield collapsed with her. Luckily, Arl was nearby. He caught the mage even as she coughed and pressed a hand to her nose to stem the renewed bleeding. Shit. There wasn't enough time for her to recover. The constructs below had clearly decided they weren't winning a war of attrition, and the survivors boiled out of their trenches to close on the besieging adventurers. These things definitely have a grasp of tactics, but it's hard to win when your defensive fortifications are turned into a trap. Chapter 40, One Glory in Battle. Nathan waved aside his concern for Stella. She was still conscious but exhausted. He turned his attention to the wave of metal bodies swarming up the slope to attack the adventurers. Finally, I get to do something useful. Wasn't much for me to do during the siege portion of the battle. He evaluated the size of the swarm. It wasn't nearly as large as the one that had attacked them outside Terran, though 36 strike constructs and over 100 scouts were nothing to sneeze at. That number was quickly reduced as the various adventurers with ranged weapons thinned the herd. The standouts were Khazar and Sarah. Khazar's arm blurred back and forth, each motion resulting in a spray of shattered metal as a skill-conjured javelin tore through a construct at supersonic speeds. Sarah, meanwhile, was laying down a slow metronome of fire with her rifle. The other adventurers glanced askance at her weapon, clearly confused as to its provenance. But nobody could argue with the results. Her bullets unerringly found the eyes and exposed barrels of the approaching war machines, and the force that reached the gathered adventurers contained only a few of the more dangerous strike constructs. Finally, the melee adventurers stepped forward, and Nathan joined them. He immediately had to skitter back as the third member of Khazar's team uncoiled a pair of metallic whips. The weapons looked like they were made of the same stranded metal as Arl's new armor, and the man flicked them through the crowd of enemies. Metal limbs flew before the flexible weapons wrapped around a pair of the machines. The two scouts writhed for a moment before they were flung like giant flails, smashing apart the center of the advancing swarm. Arl and Nathan found themselves defending on the right side while the old hands covered the left. With his new greatsword in one hand and the force saber in the other, Arl cut a swath through the front lines, and Nathan bounded back and forth to deal with the leaks. He grabbed a lashing tail and used it to pull the construct into a stamina-empowered knee. He looked around for another target, bounding sideways to rip the limbs off another scout. That pattern repeated for a minute, and after a half-dozen kills, the fight was over. Khazar almost lazily flicked 2 more javelins at the final 2 emplacements on the cliff, which were trying to re-establish the illusions that guarded the approach. Then he pulled another enchanted weapon from a pouch and pointed it down the slope. "Advance! Hold!" Kachai's voice was firm, as he held glowing palms over the arm of one of the old hands who had suffered a deep wound from the fight. Nathan noticed Delric glaring murderously at the unnamed third member of the Gleaming Fist, whose whips were coiling back into his gauntlets. "What's all that about?" Khazar visibly ground his teeth and looked like he was about to kick Kachai and the injured woman down the slope. But before he could do anything drastic, Kachai finished the spell, giving the wounded fighter a nod and a clap on the shoulder. The woman flexed her arm in wonder for a moment before Khazar's demanding shout had them all running down the slope. Nathan could have sprinted ahead but stayed back with the heirs as Stella staggered along. She leaned on Arl's arm until he scooped her up, bounding down the slope in his armor carrying her in a princess carry. "That's worrying, but better she stick with us instead of staying behind." Argon froze bridges of ice across the trenches, and Nathan took a moment to appreciate the scale of the fortifications. Each trench was deep and wide, and they'd been built in a multi-layered pattern that would expose anybody who approached each layer to a vicious crossfire. Several of them were deep enough to hide the constructs, and Nathan was thankful they'd all been flushed out and forced to charge the adventurers honestly. These defenses could have held several times the force they did. But that's why we gave chase so quickly. We needed to prevent the Foundry from replenishing their numbers before we got here. He also grew impressed with Argon, and the mage on Simla's team with similar ice and water magic. The two mages had conjured enough water to partially flood many of the trenches in only a few minutes. Additionally, Argan could raise bridges of ice wherever he needed and ensure that the surface wasn't too slick to trip up the running adventurers. They approached the cliff face and Nathan looked up at the opening. It was huge, much larger than he'd guessed from their previous vantage point. I even had the big bricks for reference, and I knew that the giant siege construct could squeeze through. Whatever, we're here now. In we go, but Khazar had other ideas. I need a shot to the core, gleaming fist with me. Everybody else guard the entrance. We will vanquish this foe. Uncle, I would follow inside the foundry fortress, Simla protested. Let me aid you. Khazar banished the idea with a wave of his hand, glancing at Stella's slumped form. This glory is mine. The spaces inside will be tight and hazardous. Ensure no forces outside the fortress enter behind us. There is glory in that. Guard the entrance, for I will not be long. Then he and his two companions charged into the colossal opening. The tunnel quickly angled down, and they were out of sight in moments. The remaining adventurers looked around at one another. Delric's voice sounded out, gruff and commanding. We don't have enough bodies to guard anything but the entrance. Back into the opening. Delric assigned one adventurer from the Old Hands and one from Simla's team to watch their backs, scanning for anything that might come out from the foundry. He shouted orders to split the entrance into 3 sectors. The Old Hands took the right side, Simla's team the left, and the heirs safeguarded the center. Arl set Stella down on the metallic floor inside the entrance and had a few quiet words with her before shoving a potion into her hands. She nodded grumpily as he let go, barely keeping herself upright as she sipped from the small bottle, grimacing at the taste. They assembled to block the wide entrance, with Katja and Arl's very different armored silhouettes on either side of Nathan, while Sarah crouched just in front of Stella. There was a minute of silence as everybody caught their breaths, and Nathan looked around at the other adventurers. This wasn't a great defensive position, but he didn't see anything coming at them, no traces of any constructs descending out of the hills. Maybe we just wait here until Khazar and the Gleaming Fists finish the job, then it's back to Terran for a celebration. Or maybe they die down there and we have to go in after them. Retreating from an intact foundry that continues to spit out war machines is a bad option, and so is splitting the party. Damn it, Khazar. Another quiet moment caused the rest of the adventurers to relax even more, though nobody sheathed their weapons. An explosion echoed up the metal corridor behind them and the tension returned. The floor reverberated under their feet. Was that it? Are we done? Nathan didn't have time to follow that line of thought any further as the sound of squealing metal echoed through the trenches. The adventurers swung their eyes down from the hills to the fortifications in front of them, and Nathan caught a glimpse of a panel sliding away in one of the trenches, the opening leading down into darkness. That can't be good. A wave of strike constructs poured out, red eyes turning to focus on the adventurers squatting in the tunnel. Yeah, that's not good. Then several enormous legs reached out of the deep trench, and 2 12-legged spiders hauled themselves onto the flat ground. They each took up a position at the head of a spearhead of strike constructs and lumbered towards the adventurers. It would be hard for it to be less good. The adventurers didn't have cover against the fusillade of magically fired spikes, and their methods to solve the problem varied between teams. Kachai moved to cover Sarah and Stella, grounding his shield, and once more calling up a dome of golden light that shed the spikes like a pattering of rain. Arl deflected a few of the projectiles, trusting his armor to block any that he missed. On Nathan's left, Simla's team hunkered behind a thick bulwark of magically conjured ice, which cracked and shattered in layers as waves of metal projectiles battered against it. Delric's team was the hardest pressed, as Netta's hastily conjured illusion just served to throw off the aim of the spikes, not blocking them entirely. They took some wounds but retreated to where the tunnel turned downwards, using the lip to shelter from the onslaught. That's a pretty smart place to take up a position. Maybe we should back up too. Nathan himself dodged waves of the projectiles, which seemed to track his position closely. Almost half of the spikes being fired at the adventurers were coming his way. But Nathan had rage active, 4 movement skills, and was spending stamina to enhance his mobility. He kept 1 step ahead of the spikes, suffering the occasional wound that healed over in seconds. High-tier dodging footwork 5 achieved. Nathan prepared to blunt the charge, but as the twin assaults drove forward, it was clear the constructs were avoiding him. Each spearhead formation went for the flanks, beelining the adventurers on either side of the airs. As he watched, the spiders sped ahead, disintegration auras flickering to life. I can stay or move. If I move, I expose the airs. But they can handle things. Netta and Delric or Simla and his team, not a hard choice. Nathan charged the spider on the right, the tumult of battle roaring around him as metal sparked against stone, and the adventurers returned fire with bullets, spells, and arrows. The strike constructs really didn't want him reaching the first spider, hurling a barrage of spikes his way that formed an almost impenetrable wall of flying metal. But he dropped into a low slide, shielding his head with his forearms. A few spikes struck his legs and torso, but they barely penetrated skin to crack bone. The damage healed nearly instantly. The biggest problem was 1 spike that slipped through Nathan's shielding to hit him in the back of the head. It didn't crack his skull, but the impact rang like a bell. Nathan followed through on his planned movement, digging his feet in and launching into the air, but the smooth leap turned into a wild tumble from the disorientation of his head injury. Focus. Find the balance. Nathan willed his eyes into focus, taking control of his tumble and spending stamina to control the spin. He slammed himself towards the ground as the spider swung its metallic limbs at him. After a quick roll, Nathan spun upwards in a handspring that sent him flying off one of the giant legs. High-tier tumbling 2 achieved. Gotta reach the central body, get underneath it, and break the disintegration crystal. Nathan landed atop another leg. He hunched low, using the spider's bulk to shield himself from the continuous volleys of spikes. But just after burning away his clothes, the disintegration aura stopped, flickering out as the crystal underneath the construct retracted into its body. How? I guess it knows how I killed the last 2. Annoyingly smart. I won't have a straight shot to its innards now that the panel that protects the disintegration crystal is closed. At least it won't disintegrate Netta or Delric like this. Nathan danced down the leg, taking a second to examine the central body of the spider. It wasn't too large, and almost a third was heavily armored housings where the 12 legs connected to the main body. Thick metal plates armored the construct, joined to one another with narrow seams. Those plates aren't connected by rivets or anything. I wonder what holds them onto the body. I'm gonna bet it's magic. Nathan struck at the corner of one of the plates, trying to project his anti-magic through the blow. It wasn't something his magic absorption wanted to do, but he'd done variations of this several times, and it always felt like trying to push a hidden muscle. He exerted his will on the anti-magic, forcing his talent outwards and feeling it flex in response. There might be a development there, but I'm trying to save the old hands, not develop my talent. No wasting time. After the 4th strike, the plate's corner popped loose. Nathan moved to the adjacent corner, repeating the strike and focusing on the feeling of pushing his anti-magic out and through the armor. He struggled to keep his balance as the spider flailed, the construct trying to scrape him off its armored body. But it wasn't really positioned to strike him here. The legs just didn't flex properly to attack upwards. It doesn't really count as a weak spot if it's this heavily armored and somebody needs to survive a close-range disintegration every second they stand here. It only took 3 strikes for the second corner, and he got the next 2 in 1 strike each. His magic absorption talent flexed slightly, but it didn't feel like it was on the verge of development. The bar was just that much higher for developing an already unique talent. Regardless, Nathan ripped the plate free of its now disenchanted mount. I'll need to think about if I want to develop my anti-magic to extend outside my body with my strikes. It's not that impressive a development, but it's the only insight I've got right now. Not sure it's even a full insight yet. Nathan's introspection didn't slow him down as he reached his arm inside the exposed framework, aiming for the control unit of the spider. It was almost anticlimactic to find it and siphon out the magic, causing the enormous and extremely dangerous enchanted machine to simply slump in place. Nathan sat up, taking in the noise and complexity of the battlefield now that his small part of it was dealt with. The old hands seemed to be holding their own, with Netta establishing a series of illusory pieces of terrain that the old hands used as cover to team up on strike constructs that reached them. The heirs were doing fine in the center of the entrance, with Arl and Kacha striking at the flanking attackers while Sarah methodically knocked down strike constructs. Stella threw desultory spells, but it was nowhere near her usual battlefield showing. Simla's team didn't seem to be doing so well. The other spider was running amok, even though its legs were grooved with deep cuts. It was chasing 3 figures down the tunnel, and as Nathan vaulted off his perch, he saw it pin somebody against a wall and hold them until their armor fell to the ground, empty and brittle. I gotta take that thing down. Nathan was halfway there when a sonic boom shattered the battlefield. The spider exploded, metal spraying across the battlefield. I guess Khazar's done and on his way back. That marked a turning point in the battle, as the adventurers were more than capable of dealing with the remaining strike constructs now that the giant spiders weren't leading them. But the last vestiges of the swarm didn't retreat as they had before, dashing themselves against the defending adventurers. Nathan found himself on the far side of the battlefield, aiding Simla's reduced team against the remaining enemies. As he drained the mana from the last one, his eyes landed on a sword lying on the ground. That's one of Simla's. Wait, Nathan let the immobile enemy clatter to the metal floor, stepping toward the sword. He looked around, finding a familiar breastplate resting not far away. Many of the engravings were gone, and overall the piece of armor looked thin, like it had been corroded. It's been partially disintegrated, probably with Simla in it. I didn't even notice because I was busy taking out the construct heading for Delric and Netta. Damn, just like that. I wonder if Khazar will hold it against me. Nathan turned and looked down the long corridor extending down into the earth. Khazar and his 2 teammates were far down the passage. They stalked upwards, looking victorious and proud of it. Khazar's eyes scanned the gathered adventurers. His frown grew as he failed to find Simla. Uh-oh.